Okay, in this video we're going to go over adding structure to a project and how to do that in the simplest way. And we're going to go over to making column grids, placing columns, how to create slope structure, adding beams, adding beam systems, and how to cope together some of these beam connections. We'll also briefly go over how to make structural plans and structural only views. So the first thing you need to do is, let's go to a floor plan. So what you want to do when you're starting to lay out the structure of your building is to draw your structural grid. That's going to be a guideline for where you place all your columns and all your structural pieces. So to do that, you're going to go to the Architecture tab. You're going to come over to the Datum section, click on Grid, and you can draw the grid like so. Once you've drawn one, you can then decide if you would like to hide the bubble and move the bubble to another side. You can also then click on the grids that you've made and make new grids by copying them. You can start to lay out a structural grid for your project. You'll also find when you're drawing, Revit will guess at the names of your next column lines. So if I start changing this to letters, when I go plan north-south, you'll see it guesses at it. Now, what you can also do is fine-tune your grid and its locations. So in this case, let's say we want all of our grids to be a foot off of the wall. You can either grab the witness line and use the tab command and snap it to the face and then move it to 1 foot even, or what you can do is use your dimensional tools by under annotate. You can do an align dimension or type DI and use the tab so it selects what you want. You can draw that, and then when you click on the column, that becomes blue, and that means that's active. You change it to 1 foot. And you always keep it if you want it shown on your plans, or you can remove it. And I'll go over the other way of doing that was to click on the column grid, find your witness line. You can see this one is going to the center of this wall. Grab one of its legs, and then right now, once I go to the center of this wall again, if you hold it over the edge and hit tab once, it'll select that, and you can adjust it to something a little cleaner than 229 over 256. I'm going to do that all the way around. Hit the tab button. So we have a good consistent relationship around the project with our column grid. So I'm going to move over a little bit first. So that we're not going negative on the dimension. Alright, that's our column grid. And work as our structural grid for the project. So the next thing to do is to put in columns. So to do that, we're going to actually go, you can go to the Architecture tab, well, we're just going to go to the Structural tab, and we're going to select a column. You'll see by default it has selected a wide flange column. And what it is doing is it's showing where it's going to start. It's going to start at the foundation level. Oops. So once you have your column selected, you'll see when you zoom in, you can also select to put them at the grid lines. That's where you select the lines and place them. But if you also hover over your grid lines, when they both highlight, it's going to put a column right where their intersection is. So you should just be able to click at your grid lines and add some columns. And then hit escape to clear the command so that it stops trying to place a column. And the next thing we're going to do is make a 3D view of just the structure so we can start to see what we're making. Right now we're working in plan. It's kind of hard to see what we're making. So I'm going to go to my 3D view and I'm going to right click on it and duplicate it. I'm going to rename it structure or 3D structure. Just so we have a 3D view that shows us what we're making. Then you can either type VG for visibility graphics or go to view and visibility graphics. And we are going to select everything, uncheck them, select nothing, scroll down, and let's get all of our structural stuff back. The main ones we really want are structural columns, structural beam systems, and structural framing. And you'll see that shows us that our columns are kind of stubby. If we click on them, it's because they're only going from the foundation to the lower level. So only going up about 4 feet on this project. What we can do is select them all and tell them to go up to the roof. That's a little closer to where we want them to go. We'll fine-tune their overall height later. So now, let's make that roof. So to do that, what we have to do first on this particular project, I'm going to go to 3D just to show you, is we have a sloping roof. You can see like that. So what we want to do is we want to have our beam slope with it. So let's go to a view that shows that slope, not the north view. Let's try the east view. There. And we're going to draw a reference plane that we're going to make our structure off of. So let's go to the architecture tab. We're going to click on reference plane, and we're basically going to trace the bottom of the roof. And then I'm going to tab and click on that and just extend it a little bit so that it's easier to click on. When we're in this view, you also want to select it and give it a name, and I'm going to call it roof structure. That way we can define that as the plane we want to draw on in a plan view, which is basically what we're going to do next. Go to roof. And then what we're going to do is, right now we're looking down and we're seeing the entire roof. So we're going to set the reference plane in this view. What this does is it will set the reference plane until you change it back. So you're going to set it and it's going to change from that roof datum, and it's going to go to a reference plane which we named roof structure. That's why you have to name it so you can find it here. Hit OK. And then what we're going to do is we're going to draw a beam system. So go to structure, go to beam system. Okay, we won't do the one quick click version. And what we want to do is draw a boundary line around the edge of the roof for the extents of the beam system. And then we want to play with its spacing. So boundary line, we have, I'm going to use my rectangle tool. And we're going to do it like this. Escape. So let's turn that off. You'll see you have one line that has these two parallel lines to it. What that is showing is it's assuming that this is the way the beams are going to span. They're going to go the long way, which isn't correct. Obviously, structurally, you always want your beams to span the shortest distance. So what we're going to do is click on beam direction, click on that line, and that tells it that now they're spanning plan north-south instead of plan east-west. Currently, our fixed distance is spacing out at 6 feet. So what we want to do is say make it 5 feet. And I really don't like fixed distance. Fixed distance means it's always 5 feet no matter what, and you can have a bay at the end that's not 5 feet. So what we're going to do is do maximum spacing. What that does is it is an equal spacing throughout, but it's the closest to 5 feet that it can get. So with that, we hit the green check mark. And so we can see clearly what we just did. Let's go back to our structural view. And you'll see you now have sloping steel beams that are the extent of that roof. So a couple little things. The beam system does not necessarily always draw one at the end. So we need to draw that. And we also might want to move or add beams to actually meet the columns. So to do that, let's finish off by trimming out the structure. Let's go back to that roof plan. And now we're still set on this reference plane. If I click on my reference plane, we're still set to the roof structure. That won't change in that view until you change it. So it's one thing to remember. If you change one of your floor plan's reference planes and then you go back and try and draw a wall on it, you might get some surprising results. So let's go to beam. It shows us what the wide flange is. Alright, so now we can draw these beams in. There's one. There's two. You can again use the tab command to get the endpoint. Come all the way over. Tab. Now if I hit Control Tab, I'll flip back to my 3D view. So we have our trimmed out structure. We have our beam system, and our beams are in place. So now to make some slight adjustments. One thing you can do with a beam system is you can always go to the edge of it, hit Tab until you see these dotted lines get highlighted. Click on the actual system itself, and you can always adjust its spacing on the fly. And your beams will move just like that. In this case, let's say 6 feet is close enough, and we want to just adjust these few beams to land on top of the columns. What we would do for that is we can either draw a new beam or we can unpin these so that they're unpinned. We'll do that again. So that they're unpinned from the beam system. See how it has a pin in it? You can either type up for unpin, or you can click on this, or you can just click on the little pin head and it'll become unpinned. Then that should allow me to use the align command. So if I go to modify, align, click on the face, click on the inner face of the web, that moves it right over the column. Do that a couple more times. You can also draw a new beam in the floor plan directly on the column line, or click on the wide flange and do the same. Well, actually I can't here because I forgot to unpin this beam. Click on the beam, pin it, type AL for align, and then we can align. Another way to do it is unpin and unpin, and we can go to a roof plan, and I believe if I hide this I will see. This is another trick. If you ever need something just temporarily hidden, come down to the little sunglasses down here and say hide element. That blue band around your window means something is temporarily hidden, and it just lets you see what was below that roof. Another tip is, by default, when you're in a coarse view, your structure assumes it wants you to see it in a diagrammatic mode, so it goes into a stick diagram. If you want to see your actual beams, pick something in medium or fine, and you'll see your actual beams. Right now the stick diagram is working for me to actually make these alignments. So I can use the align tool in this way of using the align, click on the column grid, click on the stick diagram. Same thing here. You can then really break apart your structural diagram, or I'm sorry, your structural system, by unpinning everything off of it if you really wanted to. And you can actually use your annotate tab and align, and make dimensions work for you for equalizing these between the column grid. So if I click on the column grid, click on the beams, go to that column grid, and then when you're done with a dimension string, you have to click off into space to make it release. And then if you click escape, click on the actual dimensions and tell it to equal, it'll equalize your structure between those two column lines. And you can always delete this once you're done with it. What it's asking is do you want them to be constrained between the two column grids? It doesn't really matter here as long as you're not moving the column grids. So you can say unconstrained so that you don't run into trouble down the road. We're going to do the same thing here. Let's say this is probably too much of a span to not have another cross beam member in there. I'm just going to draw in a singular beam by going to Structure, Beam, just drawing it right across from side to side. And then I can do the same thing. I can always equalize it. If you don't want to equalize it, let's say you wanted a specific dimension, click on the beam. These dimensions turn blue, that means they're active. You could say I want it to be 5 feet on this side. You can always delete that dimension again. So I'm going to flip back to the 3D view. Let's see what we have. Alright, now a couple little things in refining structure. One, see how these columns are crashing into it, and this one's not quite meeting it? This works for walls as well, but you can always use the attach command. I'm going to actually hold down Control and select both columns at the same time and say I want to attach them. It's saying attach column to the top, and then you select what you want it to go to. And what that did was it brought this one down and this one up, so that they are now meeting the bottom of that beam. Let's do it a couple more times so we're going to see it. Click on one, hold down Control, click on the second one, say attach, It always starts on top. If you want to do the bottom, you have to click on that and then click on that beam. You can see that they both move at the same time. You can do them individually, or you can do multiples. Just make sure all the multiples are actually going to what you're going to click on. I couldn't do one of those columns and then say it's to this beam. It would be upset then. Alright. Couple other little items. One, I'm going to turn on, come down here to make a shaded render, make it a little bit easier to see. Right now you'll see that these beams are stopping right at the outer face of that web. One option you can do is cope your beams together to make a nice connection. Not sure if this, let's go back to hidden line. But you'll see that the flange or the web of the beam is not connecting to the web of the adjacent beam. So what we can do is click on that. You can actually drag the beam through the other one. And then what we're going to do is come to modify, and we're going to cope. And what you want to do, I did that fast, what you want to do is click on the beam you want to cut and then the beam you do not want to cut. And you can see what that did is it brought the webs together so that they connect cleanly. Obviously, don't go around your project doing that to every beam if you're just going to bury it inside of a ceiling. But if you do have some exposed structure in your space, you might want to use the cope command to cleanly make your connections. And you'll see when I use it without pulling the beam through, it's not actually going to get all the way to that adjacent beam's web. So you normally want to just click on the beam, grab its little pull point, stretch it over so that they can make their connection. Another thing you do is you can choose how your corners miter together. Same thing, you can cope this, or if you come under geometry and show beam and column joins, what you'll then have is where corners come together or where two beams come together at their ends, you have options on how to join them. So if I push this little arrow, it's actually going to miter my corner. And you can lock it so it stays mitered. Or you could say I wanted it to be with this beam extending through and not this beam. But if you make both beams extend towards the end, it'll miter them, which is a fairly clean connection, especially if you have exposed structure in your building. One last thing to go over, since we didn't load anything in, I'm going to hit escape to get out of this beam connection, is we just made a steel structural frame with, just because we had steel wide flanges loaded into this project. So instead, let's say you've already made your building steel, but you decided that you want to make it out of heavy timber framing. Once you have everything made and you have columns and structural framing and a beam system like we do, this becomes fairly easy. What you do is you go to Insert and you're going to load your family. And Revit has a lot of structural families. Now Revit just has a lot of default families that you can choose from. You can always find a starting point. Let's start with the columns. What you can do is come to Wood and find a timber column. Double click on it, and what it always does with any of these structural families is it asks you what sizes would you like. So you don't necessarily have to do it one at a time. You can say I want a 6x14, hold down Control and say I want a, I don't know, 8x20, and you can go through and make your selections and hit OK. And what it does is it brings those size columns into your project. If you ever forget to have one, just go right back, and you can go right back to the same exact columns and add another size in, and it'll just add into the family. So then what you can do is, say you select all your columns. I have all my columns selected. I can then toggle and say, how about 12 by 12 heavy timber framing? Type ST for shaded render. I now have wood columns. It's the same thing for your structural framing. So let's load in some timber framing for the roof. I go load family. Structural framing is what it's called when it's beams. Columns are obviously columns. Go to wood. I'm just going to go back for a second. You can see you have concrete, light gauge steel, precast steel, and wood. You have some options. Go back to timber. But you can see you could do a manufactured wood joist. You have a lot of options for what you can use. We're going to stick with timber. And it's the same thing. You have to pick the sizes that you need for your project. So let's just pick a couple so we have them. Okay. I'm now going to select all those beams, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to filter and just make sure I'm only selecting beams. I don't want the beam systems. And I'm going to switch that to a timber frame. You can see it even kept our miter. Other things you can do is you can make adjustments. Let's say some of these have to be larger than others. You can make adjustments. And because you attached your columns, because these are attached to this beam, when we made this thicker, those columns actually went down. Just to show you how to do that quickly so you don't have to grab this and keep switching it, you can also use the match properties command. And to do that, I actually don't even know where the button is. I always just type it in. Type in MA, and you see a little paintbrush, and you'd say, I want that beam, I want that in there, and there, and there. And you can see that just quickly changed the sizes. So the match property command works on walls, floors, structure. It's a fairly handy command when it comes to making your building. And that's it. Obviously, when you're laying it out for a flat floor, it's a little more simple than the sloped roof. You would just place the same beam system at the floor level. The only difference is, and I'll do it really quickly, if we do it on the second level, and let's say we want to put in a beam system. And hit OK. Let's edit that beam system real quick since it's spinning the wrong way. The beam direction going the right way. We will actually start to see this sticking through the floor. And the reason for that is it places the beams directly at the elevation of the floor that you put it on. So if your floor thickness is, let's say, 3 inches before you get to the structure, make sure to say -3 inches on your offset. That way, when you go and look at your structure, you're not exactly coming through the top of the floor. So I'll show you what that was in 3D. What I did when I had the beam system selected, and again you have to wait till you see your dotted lines and then click on them, tab until I get them. Sometimes if you find that it's causing you trouble on selecting it, what you can do is just select everything, go to filter, and say I want nothing except that beam system. And then you just change the offset, and you'll see it keeps moving down till where you need it to be. And when we come back to the structural view, you'll see that that new beam system is set up in there. Now, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to make a structural roof plan showing the structural grid. So let's go to the roof plan. We've hidden the roof temporarily, so if we hit reset and hide, that comes back and we will no longer see our structure. So what we want to do, let's say for all your plans you need to have a structural plan too. Starting with the roof plan, we're going to duplicate this view, rename it, we call this roof structure. Pretty much the same thing that we did on the Axon. You're going to make sure you have your view selected, so it should say floor plan, type VG, visibility graphics, select everything, check nothing, select nothing, and then we're going to go down and we're going to say if we hold down shift you can select a lot of these at once. Click the box. Okay. And now that is just a structural stick diagram of your building. And what you might want to do is say you need to label this so everyone knows what kind of structure you have. Go to annotate. We're going to tag by category. We're going to say we don't want a leader. And you will see you can tag each of your beam to say what they say what they are. Each of your beams to say what they are. And then that's a simple way to get your beam system laid out, documented, and a diagram. This will also remain this way. Your roof plan is still showing your roof, but you come to this sheet and it'll show you how your structure is put together for the roof. And it'll update obviously whenever you move your structure in other views. And that's the basics for putting structure into a building.